here. I am a real person. I'm delighted to be here with you guys, but I am going to turn my camera off. I believe. There we go. And I'm going to start the presentation because there are many questions for us to cover. We're going to begin our workshop on special education, core knowledge, and mild to moderate applications. It is from now until 8 p.m. It is a recorded session tonight. It's going to be posted on the University of Memphis education website, I believe. And I'm very thankful to Dr. Tillis from the university who's online with us. She is going to man or monitor, I should say, the questions or comments. So if you do have questions or comments, please place them in the chat. As the presentation unfolds, you don't have to hold them until later. And she will alert me and we'll answer those questions that you might have. So let's get started. Tonight, we have on the agenda, I'm going to review how the test is divided, what to consider prior to taking the test, and of course, most importantly, we're going to review the content under each division of the test or category of the test. And hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. But again, let me reiterate, if you do have questions as we go through the practice questions, please place them in the chat and Dr. Tillis will be monitoring that. Thank you so much. Any questions before we get started? Anybody have any questions before we get started? All right. There are 6 categories of questions on the special education core knowledge mild to moderate applications test. There are an average of 18 questions for 5 categories and 3 constructed response questions on this test. 75% of your total score will come from the selected response questions, and the constructed response questions are worth 25% of the total score. Because this session tonight is only an hour and a half, a little bit less than an hour and a half, I'm not going to go over in detail any practice constructed response questions, but please know that I will give you a couple of hints about the constructed response questions once I finish going over the selected response questions. How to approach unfamiliar formats. This is all taken from the Praxis website. ETS is the publisher of the Praxis test. Give you guys a minute to read this slide about how to approach unfamiliar formats that they will use on the test. All right. Understanding the constructed response questions. Again, take a minute to read these tips to understanding constructed response questions. And please know with the constructed response questions, I'll probably say this again if time allows at the end, but you will be given quite a bit of information that came from a particular school, could be elementary, middle, or high school, and it is data. So if you're not familiar with reading student data for reading tests or math tests, you may want to take advantage of that if you have an opportunity or you have access to, for example, iReady data, or any other type of summative assessment data. They will provide you with letters, sometimes from community stakeholders, and give you, usually in the constructive response questions, about 3 or 4 different pieces of information, and then ask you your overarching constructive response question to respond to. And you are to refer to those documents that they provide you with. So hopefully you will pace yourself accordingly. It is worth 25%, and you will have 3 constructive response questions on the test. All right, I think number 2 on this slide is one of the most important points on this slide. Answer the question completely. You will not receive more points if you provide more than what is asked, nor will you receive any points for not addressing the whole question. So I suggest you use the scratch paper that is usually offered to you by the test administrator, and jot down any notes that come to your mind that you do not want to forget. Maybe you've memorized some information. Take advantage of receiving that scratch paper at the beginning and jot that down while you're taking the test. If you are, and you will be given questions pertaining to different laws, I would suggest you make a note of those, because you can go back, use that information. I say go back, but scratch that. You can use that information when you are responding to your constructed response questions. Throughout your test, you're going to be given information that's going to help you with subsequent questions in the test. So keep that in mind, especially when you have those law questions. Write down the information that they've given you in the question, because you can refer to that law in your constructed response question answers. I hope that makes sense. Hope that makes sense to you. Here's a disclaimer from me. I have successfully passed many Praxis tests, including the one that this workshop is preparing you guys to take. And here's some advice from me. For you to pass this test or any other test, your mind must be calm, yet full of the information on the subject. If at all possible, have a meal several hours before you take the test, so it has digested properly, and you've given your mind an opportunity to be calm and at rest, so that you can recall all of the information that you have already put into your mind. And then be confident in what you know. Try not to waver, especially in the selected response questions. Try to trust your gut, your first response. You know a lot more than you might be giving yourself credit for knowing. And then know that the Praxis test is not designed to trick you. There are some tests out there that are designed that way, but the Praxis test is not that way. Pace yourself. Remember, the test is timed. You will have 90 selected response questions and then 3 constructed response questions, where you will have to write out in narrative form or essay form your answers to. You may choose to answer the constructed response questions first and then your multiple select questions, or vice versa. I would recommend that you go through your multiple select questions first, because as I stated a few minutes ago, you should be able to use some of that information in those questions to construct your answers to your larger constructed response questions. The constructed response questions are going to include, like I stated earlier, multiple pages of student data, school data, letters from parents, from community stakeholders, maps, videos, audio recordings. If you're not familiar with analyzing data, that might be a struggle for you. So I suggest you try your best to become more familiar with those different types of data that are going to be presented to you. Try to become familiar with typical reading and math student and school data prior to you taking the test. Please answer all the questions as you want all your points necessary. We often tell our students that, and so I'm admonishing you guys, when you take the Praxis test, do not leave any of the questions blank. You will have an opportunity to possibly get the answer correct, but if you don't put any answer down, then of course you'll get it wrong. So go on your first educated guess if necessary, if you don't already know the correct answer right off. Are there any questions for me so far? All right. Believe in yourself. I've said that. Go on your first guess, not to leave any blank answers. Take what you learn in this workshop, which of course we only have a limited amount of time, so I can't delve as deep as I would if we were in person and it was a 4-hour or an 8-hour type workshop. But take the information that I do share with you in this workshop and think about what you already know. And trust me, you will be able to answer more questions than you probably think that you would. So here's some vocabulary that is just very basic for special educators: IEPs, ADHD, on the rise, I should say, IDEA, an IEP team. I should have highlighted team, IEP team, paraprofessional. You'll see parent mentioned in questions, and just know that that's referring to whoever is caring for that child. Could be biological, could be a legal guardian, surrogate, adopted parents, foster parent, etc. EBD, some people are not that familiar with EBD, emotional and behavioral disturbances or disorders. So the first category is development and characteristics of learners. It's about 14% of the whole test. Here's some major disability categories that are recognized by the IDEA. Almost every state is including a 14th category, which is developmental delay. Some states do not, but that's for you to know because you may be teaching in another state besides Tennessee. And we do recognize developmental delay as a disability category. What does the term developmental disability actually mean? So I gave you a definition for that in case you were not aware. And what are co-occurring disorders? Some special education teachers are not that familiar with co-occurring disorders. They understand it once they know the definition, but they may not be calling those disorders that a child has as co-occurring. It just means it's defined by dual diagnosis. So it's of a mental health disorder and a substance use disorder in that same child. Sometimes these diagnoses are made at the same time, and sometimes they're made at different times, but then they're put together on a child's IEP. And again, those are called co-occurring disorders. So let's go over some questions that may come to you under this particular category: development and characteristics of learners. You would take out a sheet of paper or make a mental note, use your phone, however you would like to record your answers. I think it's a good idea to just try to test what you know at this point in your preparations for taking the SPED test 5543. So which of the following considerations would not be included in the process of determining whether or not a student is eligible as having an emotional disability, an emotional and behavioral disability, EBD? Look at those choices and see if you can identify the correct answer. I bet you can. I'm going to go through the questions, and some I may read, some I may not read aloud, and give you an opportunity to choose the correct answer. And hopefully within a minute or so, you will select the correct answer, and then I'll give you the correct answer. Here's the correct answer. It's going to be B. Remember, when you have the not questions, 3 of your 4 choices are going to apply to that sentence that you can pull out of the question. 3 of those 4 answers are going to be correct. Only the one remaining is going to be the not. So which of the following considerations would be included in the process of determining whether or not a student is eligible as having an emotional disability? There are 3 choices there. And the one that's not is going to be B, your answer: students' adherence to a medicine and therapy regimen or regime. Very realistic situation also. The next question: which of the following activities would be most effective for a tactile learner to learn about the phases of mitosis? So in this question, you don't necessarily have to know the phases of mitosis. If you do, that's great, but remember, this is the special education test. So what you should hone in on the question is, how does that relate to a child having special education services? And that is tactile learner in this particular question. What activities would be most effective for a tactile learner to not just learn about phases of mitosis, but to learn about anything in the classroom is the broader question. And the correct answer would be C, because we know a tactile learner needs to be able to touch. That is going to help that student actually retain the information they're supposed to learn when they're actually able to use their hands, their fingers, their face, their feet, some part of their body to engage in the learning. So C would be the correct answer. It involves a physical activity. The next question: which of the following activities should a kindergarten teacher use to target executive functioning skills in her student? So in this question, you're going to hone in on kindergarten teacher. We're thinking younger children, and then executive functioning skills. Executive functioning skills. It's probably exactly what you're thinking. Executive functioning skills. Look at your choices. Correct answer is D. D. A group activity where the students must create and draw a unique animal. This requires planning and collaboration. It's an excellent activity for addressing executive functioning in young children. Let's go to the next question. A teacher is preparing for an annual review IEP meeting. We know that IEPs are renewed at least annually. So a teacher's preparing for that. Which of the following assessments is most beneficial to determine the current levels of academic performance? We know in our IEP, we're going to have present levels of performance as part of that IEP. But where would this present level of performance come from? The correct answer is curriculum-based assessments. That's going to provide the most current information. Of course, we want the most recent curriculum-based assessment information to be included in our IEPs for our present level of performance. Excellent, excellent. All right, our next question. Which of the following is not likely to have a negative impact on a child's academic experience? Which one is not likely? So that means that there might be a chance that all of these would have a negative impact on a child's academic experience, but which one is not so likely to have had a negative impact on whether a child is learning or not in the classroom? So many of these questions you're going to find will lend themselves to a lot of just common sense. A lot of the special education questions on this test are going to seem what just makes sense, what is logical. A lot of them are going to require that. Just what makes good sense. So, of course, you all chose the correct answer, receiving a free or reduced lunch and breakfast. Now, we know having a lunch, having breakfast is going to have an impact on a child's academic experience, but considering A, C, and D, this one would not likely have a negative impact, hopefully, on a child's academic experience. It could. We all know that it very likely could. And I believe this is going to be our last question in this category. Which of the following is most likely to have a negative impact on the behavior of a student with an emotional disability? We already know the child's behavior is not stable. They have an emotional disability. So which one of these, A, B, C, or D, would most likely have a negative impact on the behavior of that student that's already unstable emotionally? The correct answer for this one is C. Receiving reminders to cheer up, smile, look on the bright side. Those are going to be very extremely aggravating to a student that has emotional or behavioral disorders. They do not want you telling them to cheer up and to smile and, oh, it's going to get better. You're looking bright today. They don't want to hear that. That's going to have a negative impact on them. You've got to tell them that you are appreciative of the fact that they showed up at school that day and that they're going to work hard that day to get their assignments completed. Don't bring up anything related to their emotional status. It could be very irritating to them. All right, let's look at the next category, planning and the learning environment. This is going to be approximately 17% of the test. Could have anywhere from 18, 19, or as many as 20 questions on the test in this area. All of these categories are huge. So let's just go through a couple of questions that you could possibly have. And be sure to put any questions or comments that you have in the chat. Brielle is a 9-year-old student with multiple disabilities. She has limited mobility and language skills, but she is able to use eye gaze to respond or select yes or no choices from a switchboard. Brielle's teacher would like to develop a visual schedule with preferred activities for breaks. This is to encourage Brielle to complete her schoolwork. Which of the following is the best way for Brielle's teacher to select preferred activities for Brielle's breaks? Consider she has limited mobility and language skills. but she's still able to participate on a switchboard by her eye gaze. Look at your choices, see which one do you think makes sense as being the best way. The answer would be A. By giving Brielle the opportunity to select different reinforcers, her teacher will learn more about her likes and dislikes, and then her teacher can personalize the visual schedule accordingly with preferred activities that Brielle enjoys. And this is something that could be used for any number of students. Ms. Cutler has been working with her students on word problems. All problems thus far have only contained relevant material. Today, she wants to teach about distractors in problems. She asked her class if they know what a distractor is, and one student shouts out that Sarah, a student with a diagnosed behavior problem, is a distractor. How should Ms. Cutler respond? Very realistic question and scenario. How should Ms. Cutler respond? All eyes are on Ms. Cutler for sure. We know that as the teacher of record, we don't disclose any of our students' diagnoses that we are aware of. So how should Ms. Cutler respond to this student? I know you've chosen the correct answer. She's going to ask the student to step in the hallway, right, for a private conversation. This method ends the conversation and keeps students focused on their math. Remember, you handle the situation as the teacher in the classroom, but you also handle the disruption. It allows for redirection of the offending student in a private manner. That becomes even more important the higher the grade is that the student is in, because they are, as they continue to get toward a higher grade, they're more conscious of what their peers think of them. And you don't ever want to be guilty of embarrassing a student in front of their class, even if they're in the wrong. Which of the following situations would not be beneficial for classroom management in a 7th grade co-teacher science classroom, co-teacher environment? Which one would not be beneficial for classroom management? Now remember, 7th grade is one of the most difficult grades, to teach any type of content. All right, the correct answer to this question is D. Providing the reward before the students have met the expectation is more similar to bribery than to creating an appropriate incentive. That's very tempting, trust me, as a teacher. Additionally, starting the class with a game is likely to create a rowdy situation that may be difficult to control or bring back down. This situation is more likely to hinder the classroom management than help, even with 2 teachers in the classroom. Let's look at the next question. Remember, this section is planning and the learning environment. An 8th grade student with a specific learning disability in reading has 45 minutes of reading instruction in the general education classroom without in-class support. What strategies can the general education teacher implement to promote the student's active participation in the reading curriculum? Here are your choices. We know they should have support in the classroom. But special education teachers are sometimes absent. Reasons why there's only one teacher in that classroom on this particular day. Choose the correct answer. Hopefully you've chosen the correct one. A was the correct answer. Provide a guided reading group with teacher support during the independent reading time. A small group environment with direct instruction is an excellent and effective way to provide support for this type of student. Allowing the group to contain similar level peers or peer models can build confidence and self-advocacy for the student. A homogeneous small group would really work well for this type of student. We want our students to be comfortable in the classroom, no matter what their identified disability may be. Let's look at the next question. Students in an inclusion kindergarten classroom are learning a new procedure to pack up materials and prepare to exit the classroom for the bus and car rides home. Which of the following methods would be most effective in teaching the students this procedure? So this is an inclusion classroom. We know we have some students that are considered typical or normal students, and then we have some students that have been identified with a disability in this classroom. But everyone needs to know how they're going to get home and need to know how to exit the classroom. So what do you think would be an effective way to teach the students what your expectation is for them when it's time to pack up and prepare to exit? I know your students don't want you to choose A. Give the students a homework assignment to memorize the 4 steps, not at the kindergarten level, not at any grade level. They're not going to want you to give them a homework assignment before it's time to go out the door. So let's see what the correct answer is for this one. It's C, providing the students with multiple opportunities to practice. And this works no matter if they're at kindergarten level or they're in high school. They need multiple opportunities to practice the routine, whether they have an identified disability or they don't have an identified disability. Practice, practice, practice the routine that you are expecting. That's going to be the best way for these students to remember the routine and to follow it. I know you guys chose that. Excellent, excellent. Here's another question. A 4th grade student received services for an emotional disability due to a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. His anxiety seemed to be heightened when dealing with unexpected changes to his routine. Which of the following positive behavioral supports would be most appropriate for him? And we know post-COVID, we have many students that are not diagnosed, but could be diagnosed as having some type of anxiety disorder. So we need to be conscious of that in our classrooms and consider that as well when we're answering this type of question. Which of the following positive behavioral supports would be most appropriate for this student? Let's see what the correct answer was. Reviewing a daily schedule. Review a daily schedule with him and highlighting those events. Very, very, very good answer choice, and a correct answer on top of that. This gives the child a chance to process the changes before they occur and be aware of the possibility that it could happen. Children become very, very used to schedules, and some adults do as well, but for someone that has an emotional disorder and anxiety, knowing their schedule is very comforting. A kindergarten student who has displayed aggression watches his peers take turns at recess. Over time, he begins playing appropriately with his peers. Good for him. Which of the following theoretical approaches is demonstrated in this situation? So that means we have to be familiar with these: constructivism, cognitivism, social learning theory, or connectivism. In this question, we're talking about a student and his peers. So even if you weren't familiar with what constructivism meant, or cognitivism, or connectivism, you see the word social here, and that should be an indicator to you that that could possibly be the correct answer, because we're talking about this kindergarten student watching his peers. He's learning how to play with his peers. That sounds like it's a social situation. And that's the correct answer. Social learning theory asserts that children learn by observing and imitating others. Sometimes this is called social cognitive theory, where we we assimilate to what we are around, what we see other people doing. We pick up on those actions and just think, oh, I should be doing that as well. And children do that very well. Let's look at this question. I'll give you a moment to read this question and to choose a correct answer. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to go that quickly. That was my fault. But you see the correct answer. Which of the following suggestions should the teacher advise his parents to try at home to help them get ready for kindergarten? Again, develop a routine. That's going to help reduce anxiety as the child becomes familiar with this new morning routine, and its transition from home to school may be more smooth. And this is a transition that will happen from elementary to middle school, if it's a separate building or a different building, and then from middle school to high school as well. And then from high school to post-high school environment. Here's our next question. Which of the following is the best strategy for providing an effective continuity to ease the transition of special education students from elementary to middle school, from an elementary program to a middle school program? Which one of these is the best strategy? All right, the correct answer for this one is C. This is the best answer because as students transition, it's important that their individual needs are still being met. If the instruction implements the appropriate adjustments, then the transition will be much smoother. This requires communication, of course, between the two schools, elementary and middle, and then between middle and high, and then from high to post-high high school. So this section is on category 3, is instruction, another large category of this test. And questions, maybe 20 on this particular part of the test, which is about 17% of the whole test. Instruction. Let me give you a moment. Look at this question. What would be the best way for Mr. Parsons to prepare for the meeting? Remember, he wants to make sure that they have a successful year. Let's see what the correct answer is. C. Oh, I did not mean to do that. This is the first step in preparing to meet with the other instructor. It is important for Mr. Parsons to know where his students are and what their current learning goals are in order to suggest the best instructional methods and strategies to the alternative teacher. I chose questions to go over with you guys that I thought were the most realistic type questions, and that would give you more information than just basic information. So I hope that works to benefit you. Next question. Which of the following are accommodations allowable under IDEA? And there's more than one correct answer. These are those questions where you choose multiple answers that are correct. Could be one, could be more than one, of course, because they say select all answers. So you know you're going to have at least two and not all four. Usually if they say select all answers that apply, you don't just have one. It's usually two or more. So the correct answer to this question is going to be C, providing large print materials or replicas of what other students are using. So it's an accommodation. Providing extended time for tests. We know extended time does not change what is learned, making it an accommodation. The other options are modifications. Modifications, reducing the number of spelling words from 10 to 5. And providing manipulatives for a student to demonstrate mastery rather than their written work. That one is kind of questionable. It could go either way. It really could go either way. Providing manipulatives, it just kind of depends on what those manipulatives are. A sixth grade social studies classroom is learning about the Stone Age and is going to be reading a text about hunters and gatherers and highlighting key ideas and details. Which of the following is a modification that might be appropriate for a boy in the class with a specific learning disability in reading, who can read independently at a third grade level? We've got to really be careful with these identifications of children these days. Although this question says boy, we all are aware in our current classrooms, we will have students that may physically appear to be a particular sex, but they are identifying with another sex. And so we have to really be cognizant as teachers when we say, oh, I need a boy to do this, or I need a girl to do that. But in this question, it specifically says a boy. All right, hopefully you've chosen the correct answer, which was A. This would be an appropriate modification because it allows the student to access as much of the material and activity as possible while being appropriate for his reading level. This would allow the student to work independently and still meet a similar learning target to the rest of the class. Remember, we do not want to embarrass our students. Paola is an 11th grade student who participates in an inclusion classroom for algebra. She has a vision impairment as well as an emotional disability. Which of the following accommodations would be most appropriate for Paola when being administered the state assessment? Remember, accommodations are still allowing materials to be on the grade level for that student. It's not remedial work. So which of the following accommodations would be most appropriate for Paola? All right. Providing a large print test booklet will address Paola's visual impairment. Excellent. Now we know that in this question, it gave us some background. It said she had a vision impairment as well as an emotional disability. But we don't have an option here in our choices that will allow us to address the emotional disability. So we chose which one of these options would allow us to address her vision impairment. And that would be the large print test booklet. It does not say in the information we were given that she struggles with algebra. It just says that she has a vision impairment. So this is one of those times where we don't want to read more into the question than what is already stated. For reading activity, an inclusion teacher has guided most of the class through a during reading activity, while some students work independently and other students are assigned to partners. What type of strategy is the teacher using with the class? So the students are actively reading. That's our key for this particular question. What is the strategy? Correct answer, flexible grouping. The teacher is using flexible grouping by assigning whole group, small group, partner, and independent work according to the student's needs. So it says that the inclusion teacher was doing a during reading activity. So some students work independently and other students are assigned to partners. In your mind, you should have thought, okay, that means that they're not all together. So it wouldn't be modified assignment. It could be some type of differentiation, but the fact that they're not all together in the question is letting you know that they're separated, and that would be grouping, flexible grouping. This is a long scenario. Wilson is a student in kindergarten who has autism. Wilson does not often verbally communicate with his teachers or peers, but he has advanced skills in the area of writing. Wilson is highly interested in letters, words, and written language, and he functions well beyond his peers. When Wilson attempts to verbally communicate and is not understood by his teacher or his peers, he becomes upset and begins hitting his head against his desk or the wall. Wilson almost always becomes upset when he's working with a peer group. Which step below is the best step for Wilson's teacher to take in order to keep the communication open between Wilson and his peers and his teachers? So we see the full picture, a very realistic picture. Look at these steps below, A, B, C, and D. Which one would be the best step for his teacher to take? Remember, we want to keep communication open. All right, the correct answer was A. Wilson's teacher can provide Wilson with pictures he can point to that have corresponding labels and definitions to show objects, common responses to questions, and actions. This is the best step because it includes information interesting to Wilson. Remember, words and definitions, and communication helpful to his peers. So we want to make sure that when we have a student such as Wilson, a student that has been identified with autism, that we gain as much information as we can from the parents or from other teachers as well, so that we can use that information to help us in our instruction with a student like Wilson. So Wilson can be successful in the classroom. All right, our next question. A first grade teacher receives a new student who has a diagnosis of autism. He is supported by special education services, but spends most of his time in the general education classroom. His current reading level is unknown, and he often loses interest in independent work, choosing to draw instead, hopefully not on our desk in the school. He also frequently sits by himself at lunch and recess and does not participate in group activities, which is not unusual for a child that's been diagnosed with autism. Which classroom accommodation would be most appropriate to assist this type of student? What do you think? Would it be providing an incentive system for completing his independent work, allowing the student to draw during independent work instead of doing his work? C, placing the student next to the teacher's desk, close proximity, or D, creating a separate area of the classroom for the student to work in. Bet you chose the correct answer. It was A, providing an incentive system for completing his independent work. Remember in the question, it said that he often loses interest in his independent work, and he'd rather do a drawing instead. So what we want to do is encourage a child that has autism to actually complete their work. We want them to be involved in actually feeling some level of success. So providing an incentive system is the correct answer here. Next question. Below is an excerpt from Journey's present level of academic achievement and functional performance statement. It's on her IEP, the PLAAFP, really long title. And then that's why we use that acronym, PLAAFP. Journey is a 7th grade student with a specific learning disability in the area of reading. Journey demonstrates strengths with auditory memory, but experiences deficits in the area of processing speed. She attends general education classes in the inclusion setting with support from a special education teacher. Journey advocates for herself by asking for help. We commend her for that when she does not understand. She benefits from the use of checks for understanding, repetition of directions, positive support and feedback. Which of the following assessment accommodations may be most appropriate for Journey? We want her to continue to be successful. So what type of accommodation could we allow for Journey when it comes to her assessments? We know her specific learning disability is reading. Could be basic reading, could be reading comprehension. We just know it's in the area of reading. But she listens very well. And she's not too quick to complete her assignments. Her area of processing, she has some deficits. The correct answer would be providing a human reader for assessments. Because she has this SLD in the area of reading, it's going to be good for her to have someone read the test aloud. You may have heard of read aloud. And that's what this is referring to, providing a human reader for her assessments, for Journey's assessments. Since she has a strong auditory comprehension skill, that means that she will be listening keenly to someone actually reading the test for her. So this would be the most appropriate accommodation for her. All right. And I thought this diagram would be beneficial to show you guys, just as a reminder. You already know this information, but just as a reminder of this information, the difference between an assessment and an evaluation. Oftentimes they're used as synonyms, but there is a difference between an assessment and an evaluation. The assessment portion of this test is going to be approximately 14% of the test and may have as many as 17 questions on the test. Let's look at our first question to review. Regarding the violations of the local education agency, which is the local school, code of conduct for students with disabilities, and the days of removal, are half-day removals considered a day? So think about it. Regarding the violations of the LEA, code of conduct for students with disabilities, and the days of removal, are half-day removals considered a whole day? Usually school districts have come up with what's going to be the actual rule of thumb for all the schools, all of the LEAs in that school district. And there are some exceptions from time to time for the students with disabilities. So this question is just assuming that there is a difference for the code of conduct for students with disabilities. And it's specifically looking at days of removal or half-day removals, suspensions, in other words. So let me give you the answer to this one. According to legal precedents, removal for any part of the day is considered a day of removal and constitutes a change of placement. So even if it's just part of the day, for most students, like I said, school districts and states vary on this from time to time, but the code of conduct for this particular question for our state of Tennessee, and this particular question, it's saying that any part of the day is going to be considered a day of removal. And so if you move a child anytime during that part of any of that day to be somewhere else, that's going to be considered a change of placement. So if you move them from their inclusion classroom to an ISS room, for example, that's going to be considered a change of placement for that child. So in ISS, that child would still receive their special education services, just like they would have in their inclusion classroom. Sometimes the special education teachers have to remind their administrators of that type of information. The special education teacher collects data on a student's progress on phonemic awareness to determine what? A, if further intervention is needed to meet criteria and plan for future instruction. B, what the general education teacher is working on during reading intervention. C, if the student is working on phonemic awareness activities at home. Or D, how many letter sounds the student knows. Why is the special education teacher collecting data on the student's progress on phonemic awareness? It's to determine which one of these. Data collection and assessment are the means with which special education teachers can make informed decisions on student progress. So this special education teacher is collecting this data on the student's progress to find out if further intervention is necessary or needed to meet criteria, because the special education teacher has the IEP. They are the deliverer of the information on the IEP to the general ed teachers. So the special education teacher has that obligation to stay on top of what that student's progress is in those areas that we had a present level presented on their IEP. Remember, all these questions refer to assessment. Which of the following best describes an example of a criterion referenced test? Which one of these best describes an example of a criterion referenced test? Give you a moment. The choices. All right. The answer is B, assessing a ninth grade student's knowledge and application of the parts of a cell after completing a plant and animal cell unit in biology. This is the best example of a criterion reference test, since students are asked to demonstrate mastery of a specific area of content that they've received instruction in. And that's what happens with criterion reference test versus norm reference. A fifth grade special education teacher administers a pre-assessment to her small group before beginning a new math unit. What knowledge can the special education teacher gain by administering this assessment? What knowledge can the special education teacher gain by administering this assessment? You can't ever go wrong mentioning pre-assessment and post-assessment. Which one of these is the correct answer for this question. The correct answer was A. The teacher can determine how much time must be spent on each of the concepts by how the student scores. Most definitely, pre-assessments are going to help the general ed teacher as well as the special education teacher tailor what needs to be taught to that student, what needs to be emphasized to that student so that they understand what they're supposed to understand. The results from this assessment can shape the instruction and all the activities and allow the teacher to meet that student's individual needs. That's the key. The pre-assessments are an amazing thing to do in your classroom on a regular. And then, of course, follow up with a post-assessment after the instruction. Let's look at another question. Ms. Cooper uses Think, Pair, Share as a way to evaluate progress and adapt instruction. Which type of assessment is this? I Think, Pair, Share, one of my favorite assessments. Which type of assessment is this? Is that considered a summative assessment, a formative assessment, a standardized achievement testing, or a guided practice? I think we all could eliminate C. We know this is not a standardized achievement test. What do you think? Think, pair, share. It's a way to evaluate progress. Doesn't take up a lot of time, can be done more than once in one class period. Hopefully you chose the correct answer. It is a formative assessment. This is the correct answer because formative assessment is a process used by teachers and students during instruction that provides feedback to adjust ongoing teaching and learning to improve students' achievements of intended instructional outcomes. You can have many formative as well as informative assessments throughout your lesson. Special education teachers and general education teachers will use formative assessments to guide their instruction. I believe there's another question in this area of assessment. Nope, I was incorrect. We're going to go on to the fifth category. The fifth category is the last selected response question category, and it is foundational or foundations and professional responsibilities. It's going to take up about 13% of the exam, and you may have as many as 16 questions on this particular section. In this section, we're going to be talking about professional responsibilities of the special education teacher, as well as law questions, questions pertaining to special education law. Which of the following is not a required member of an admission review dismissal meeting? One of these choices, A, B, C, or D, is not a required member. So they may still participate in an admission review dismissal meeting, an ARD, but they're not a required member. Is it the general ed teacher, a school administrator, the special education teacher, or the parent's legal counsel, their own personal attorney? Which one is not a required member of the ARD? You may have guessed it. It's the parent's their legal counsel, their preferred attorney, their own attorney, their personal attorney. The parents are able to bring legal counsel to an ARD meeting, just like they can bring their own legal counsel to an IEP meeting with prior notice, of course, to the school district or to the school, but the presence of a legal counsel is not required. Of course, the general ed teacher, the school district administrator, the special education teacher, those are required members. But if parents want to invite anyone other than just themselves at any type of meeting regarding their child's special education services, whether it's an ARD or it's an IEP meeting or an IFSP meeting, they have to alert the school, and in some school districts, alert the school district as well, that they're bringing legal counsel. They have that right, but they have to give prior notice. A fourth grade student was recently found to be eligible for special education services as a student with a health impairment. This decision was made at an eligibility meeting, and the student's parents agreed with the decision. The IEP team met to develop and propose an initial IEP. What is the appropriate next step? So we see that an eligibility meeting has already occurred. We see that the student does have a health impairment, and the parents were in agreement with that decision. I'm assuming the whole IEP team was in agreement. So that was made up of a general ed teacher, a special education teacher, an administrator or assistant principal, and then the parent. What is the appropriate next step? The next step is that the IEP team must receive their parent consent and agreement to the proposed IEP and placement prior to beginning to implement the IEP. So that means you have got to remember, although your parents agreed in the meeting, they still have to sign. They're still going to have to sign the actual document, obtain their parent agreement and consent to begin the services. So they still need to sign several pieces of paper, actually, not just one, before the services will begin. Of course, you receive consent even when you're gathering your information prior to a decision being made for the student to receive special education services. Next question. A first grade student has recently been diagnosed with autism, and his parents are attending their first ARD meeting. The student's mother admits to the special education teacher that she is nervous and does not understand some of the process. How can the special education teacher assist the parent in the ARD meeting? How can the special education teacher assist the parent? The special education teacher is not just an advocate for the student, they are also advocates for that student's parents as well. They often have to educate the parents as well as the student. Maybe they're educating the student on their educational journey, but they're educating the parents also in the whole process that takes place when a child receives special education services. What is the process and the procedures that happen when you have a child that has received special education services? Let's see. Is that special education teacher going to just tell the parent there's nothing to worry about? Are they going to provide the parent with a copy of the procedural safeguards, which is going to outline those parents' rights and privileges for having a child receiving special education services? If there is some type of disgruntled case going on where the parent is not in total agreement with what the IEP team has presented before them, those procedural safeguards are going to allow that parent to know what is the process they would go through for a grievance of a decision that they did not agree with. Or C, is the special education teacher going to explain common acronyms that occur during the meeting? Or is the special education teacher going to allow the parent to guide the meeting and debrief them afterwards? Debrief with them afterwards? Hopefully not. The correct answer would be C. There are many, many acronyms. As a student, I know you're becoming more and more aware of all these acronyms that you need to know. So by explaining jargon that is commonly used in an ARD meeting or an IEP meeting, the parent can better follow the process of the meeting. While the many acronyms used in special education can be helpful, they can also be intimidating to parents, especially those that are new to the process. A speech language therapist is unable to attend an annual IEP meeting for a student who is identified as having an SLD primary and then a secondary speech language impairment. The student's current IEP will expire in 3 days. How can the IEP team address the speech language therapist's absence? Because it has got to be addressed in the minutes of that IEP team meeting, especially considering it's about to expire in 3 days. But we know we're all human, and so a speech language therapist may not be available for some reason. Maybe the person is sick or someone in the family is sick. So what can that IEP team do to address the speech language therapist's absence? Look at your choices. Let's see. D, ask the parents if they are willing to excuse the speech language therapist. It's going to be noted in the minutes. And that speech language therapist, who is a required member of the team, will get back with those parents at a later date, as well as the rest of the team. But they can continue with the meeting without the speech language therapist. Hopefully, there have been some notes already shared with the special education teacher so that that information can be shared with the parents during the meeting, and it'll be reflected in the minutes. All right, according to the guidelines, the IEP committee must address all of the following when planning for students with autism, except, according to guidelines, the IEP committee must address all of these except for one they don't have to address for students with autism. Let's see what that answer was. C, typical grade level peers. While curriculum influences a student's goals, an IEP should be focused on that student as an individual rather than comparing them to their peers. Something that the special education teacher is going to be very cognizant of. All right, the last section of your special education test, Praxis test, is going to be on constructive response questions. It's going to take up 25% of the test. Your questions could pertain to just instruction and assessment, collaboration between the special education teacher and the general ed teachers and parents. It could involve questions about just the learning environment in the classroom management with co-teaching and that type of thing. So it's just a wide open area of what could be in your constructed response question. But again, I would encourage you to use the information that you've gathered from your selected response questions to help you when you construct your answer to those constructed response questions. It's been my pleasure to share some time with you guys. There's so much information. Oh my gosh, so much information. I really hope you all do well. Believe in yourself. Do you have any questions for me? Any questions? I wish it could go on. So much.
I didn't catch the first section that you went over. What was the name of that?
The very first category, because there are 6. The first one's called Development and Characteristics of Learners.
Okay, thank
you. You are welcome. You are welcome. And this was recorded, so if you're able to go back, you can see those questions and the answers to those questions that we covered in each one of the categories. It has been my pleasure, definitely been my pleasure. Let me share my information with you guys. These were some test taking tip reminders. Don't skip the hard questions, guys. You all can answer them. Keep track of your time. Answer the question. Try not to add more to the question than what's already there. And thank you so much, University of Memphis, for this opportunity to give back to my community. I received my master's degree at the University of Memphis, and so it is just my pleasure to represent my sorority, the National Sorority of Phi Delta Kappa Incorporated, and also just to represent myself as alumni of University of Memphis.